My boss said I was like family. Now he's threatening to ruin my career because I refuse to sleep with him. I'm a 29-year-old woman, and I've spent the last 7 years building my career from nothing. I don't come from money. No connections, no family favors. Just hard work, late nights, and sacrifice. When I landed a job at one of the most respected firms in my city, it felt like everything I'd fought for was finally paying off. I was determined to prove myself, first in, last out, always saying yes to extra work. I didn't care about the long hours or the stress. My boss, Philippe, was one of those charismatic types. Mid-40s, polished, always charming in that successful businessman way. Everyone respected him. Everyone said how lucky I was to have caught his eye as a mentor. At first, he was kind. Supportive, even. He gave me big projects. He called me brilliant, said I reminded him of himself when he was younger. I felt proud. Seen. But then the compliments became something else. He started texting me late at night. Nothing too inappropriate, at first. Just work questions. Then emojis, then jokes about how hard I worked, how I deserved to have more fun. I brushed it off. I laughed politely. I told myself I was imagining things. That he was just being friendly. But then came the business trip. It was supposed to be simple, 2 days in Lyon for client meetings. There was a group of us going, but somehow, at the last minute, it ended up being just me and him. The others couldn't make it, and I was too eager to prove myself to question it. The first night, after dinner, he invited me to have a drink in the hotel bar. I didn't want to. Every cell in my body was screaming no. But I felt trapped. Saying no would have looked weird, rude. And in this world, reputation is everything. So I went. 1 drink turned into 2. He kept leaning in closer. His hand brushed mine. His smile shifted into something darker. Then he said it, softly, casually, you could go far here, if you wanted to. I felt my stomach drop. I laughed nervously. I told him I was tired and needed to rest. I got up, heart pounding, and walked back to my room without looking back. I locked the door that night and barely slept. The next morning, he acted like nothing had happened. Smiled. Made jokes. Carried on as usual. I tried to convince myself I was safe. That maybe I'd overreacted. That I could just keep my head down and move on. But I was wrong. When we got back, everything changed. Suddenly, I was left out of meetings. Projects I'd been promised vanished. I stopped receiving emails about key deals. And when I asked Philippe about it, he gave me that same chilling smile and said, maybe you're just not as motivated anymore. I felt like I was losing my mind. I knew what this was. I knew, but I also knew I had no proof. Nothing concrete. Just a sick feeling in my stomach and a career that was starting to crumble under me. And then, last week, it got worse. I received an anonymous envelope at home. Inside were printed screenshots, photos of me from that night at the bar. Blurry but clear enough. Smiling. Laughing. A moment frozen out of context. And a single note written in thick black pen, don't forget who helped you. I felt cold all over. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I'd faint. I realized, in that moment, that I wasn't just being pushed out of my career, I was being blackmailed. I don't think I've ever felt panic like I did that night. I must have read that note 100 times, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the paper. I kept flipping through the blurry photos, my mind racing in circles. When were these taken? Who took them? How did they get to me? The worst part was how subtle it was. There was no outright threat. No demands. Just those words, don't forget who helped you. But I knew exactly what it meant. Philippe was letting me know that he controlled the story, that if I so much as tried to expose him, he could twist the truth, make it look like I had been the one chasing him. That I had flirted. That I had wanted it. I felt sick to my stomach. I barely slept that night. I kept getting up, checking the locks, staring at my phone like I was waiting for something, another message, another envelope. But nothing came. Just the unbearable silence. The next morning, I showed up at the office feeling like I was made of glass. Every time someone looked at me, I felt exposed. Like they knew. Like the walls were closing in. Philippe acted as if nothing had happened. He smiled. He waved. He even complimented me on a report I'd submitted weeks ago. The performance was flawless. I wanted to scream. The isolation started to get worse. Meetings I used to lead were now passed on to other people. I wasn't invited to after-work drinks anymore. One of my closest colleagues, Julie, started avoiding me completely. At first, I thought I was being paranoid. But then I overheard two junior associates whispering in the break room. Apparently she got promoted because she was close to Philippe. Yeah, I heard they went on a business trip alone. You know what that means. My blood ran cold. He wasn't just freezing me out. He was rewriting the story. Turning me into the villain. The seductress. The woman who slept her way to the top. And it was working. I tried to talk to Julie, to explain, but she barely met my eyes. She mumbled something about being busy and walked away. That night, I went home, poured myself a glass of wine, and cried so hard my chest physically hurt. I kept thinking, what do I do? Go to HR? They'd never believe me. Philippe was too powerful, too respected. He was friends with half the senior management. Even if I spoke up, what would I say? I had no proof, nothing except those photos, which he could twist against me. For days, I felt paralyzed. Until something happened that pushed me over the edge. One of the junior associates, a guy named Kareem, pulled me aside discreetly. He told me, voice low, eyes darting around, look. I don't know what's going on between you and Philippe. I'm not judging. But he's been saying things. He's telling people you've been unstable. That you've been drinking too much. That you imagined things on that trip. Be careful, okay? My heart dropped. It wasn't just whispers anymore. He was actively dismantling me. Piece by piece. My reputation. My sanity. My career. And that's when I realized, I couldn't stay silent. Not anymore. I had to fight. Even if it meant losing everything. Because if I didn't, he was going to take it all anyway. The decision to fight back wasn't a brave one. It wasn't some grand moment of courage. It came from pure survival instinct. Because I realized if I didn't act, I was going to lose everything anyway, my job, my reputation, my sanity. I spent the next 3 nights researching every single law, every HR policy, every story I could find of workplace harassment cases. I barely slept. My heart was racing constantly, my hands cold, my stomach in knots. But I kept going. I needed to find a way to turn the power back in my favor. I thought about going to HR immediately, but something stopped me. I knew how these companies operated. HR doesn't exist to protect the employees, they exist to protect the company. And Philippe was the company. He'd been there for 15 years. He was friends with the CEO. He played golf with the head of HR. If I went to them without a solid plan, they'd bury me. So I started documenting everything. Every email. Every message. Every conversation I could remember. I even printed out the anonymous envelope and the screenshots inside. I also reached out, carefully, discreetly, to 2 former colleagues who had left the company in the last year. Both were women. Both had left abruptly, without explanation. I found one of them on LinkedIn. I sent her a neutral message, just asking if we could talk. She agreed. What she told me made my blood run cold. She'd experienced the same thing. The same pattern, attention from Philippe, late-night texts, a subtle escalation, and then, when she politely declined, a slow, deliberate professional death. Her projects were taken. Her evaluations tanked. She was pushed out. The second woman told me almost the exact same story. I felt physically sick. It wasn't just me. It was a pattern. A strategy. A system. I wasn't dealing with a personal betrayal. I was dealing with a predator who'd been doing this for years. I asked both women if they'd be willing to provide statements. One said yes immediately. The other hesitated but said she'd think about it. It wasn't much. But it was something. And then, something I didn't expect happened. Philippe escalated. One afternoon, I was called into a surprise meeting with senior management. 3 people. Stone-faced. No warning. They accused me, calmly, politely, of unprofessional behavior. They said concerns had been raised about my mental stability, about my performance, about my conduct on the business trip. I sat there, my heart pounding so hard I could barely hear them, and I realized he was trying to preempt me. To discredit me before I could speak. I left the meeting in a daze. But deep down, something clicked. This wasn't about surviving quietly anymore. This was war. That night, I emailed both former colleagues again. I told them everything, every detail, every lie, every threat. I begged them for help. One of them responded almost immediately, "I'm in. Tell me what you need." The second followed a day later, "I'll write the statement. I'm sick of being scared." I cried when I read those messages. Not out of sadness, out of sheer, overwhelming relief. I wasn't alone. Not anymore. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: hope. The moment those 2 women agreed to help me, something in me snapped back into place. For weeks, I'd felt powerless, like I was drowning under the weight of Philippe's manipulation, but now? Now I had witnesses. I had proof. And most importantly, I had nothing left to lose. I spent the next few days assembling everything. I built a file, printed copies of every message Philippe had ever sent me, the anonymous envelope, the photos, my performance reviews from before everything shifted, the statements from the 2 women. I organized it all into a binder like I was going to war. Because I was. I still remember the morning I finally went to HR. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped my coffee. My heart was pounding so violently it made me feel nauseous. The woman I met with, Sophie, ironically, listened politely at first. But I could see it in her eyes, doubt. The way she kept nodding too fast. The way she interrupted me to clarify things. The way her face stayed unnervingly neutral when I described the night at the hotel. I pulled out the binder. I laid it on the table. And I said, quietly but firmly, "I'm not here to ask for sympathy. I'm here to tell you that if this company doesn't take action, I will." Her face changed. Just slightly. But it changed. I explained everything. I handed over the written statements from the 2 former employees. I made it clear, if this wasn't dealt with properly, I would go public. I would contact the press. I would pursue legal action. I left that meeting shaking, drained, exhausted beyond words. But I knew, I'd finally shifted the power. The next few days were a blur. HR opened an internal investigation. Philippe stopped coming into the office. Whispers started to spread, but they were different this time. Not the cruel rumors he'd planted, but hushed, curious conversations about why he'd suddenly disappeared. And then came the email. A formal one. From the CEO himself. Philippe had resigned. Effective immediately. No details. No explanations. Just, gone. I sat there, staring at the screen, my hands numb. I thought I'd feel victorious. I thought I'd cry with relief. But all I felt was empty. Hollowed out. Because the damage was still there. The humiliation. The betrayal. The lost trust. That night, I opened a bottle of wine alone and sat in the living room of my tiny apartment, staring at nothing. I kept thinking about how close I'd come to losing everything. How easily he could have destroyed me. And I wondered, how many more women like me were still out there? Still scared? Still silent? The next morning, HR called again. They wanted to know if I intended to take further action now that Philippe was gone. I paused. I didn't know the answer yet. I just knew that no matter what happened next, I wasn't the same woman I'd been 2 months earlier. Something inside me had changed forever. The day I received the email announcing Philippe's resignation, I sat at my desk for almost an hour without moving. My screen was open, the words glowing in front of me, but it was like my brain couldn't fully absorb them. He was gone. No explanation. No public scandal. Just a single cold sentence from the CEO: "We wish Philippe the best in his future endeavors." The office was buzzing. Even though no one dared say much out loud, you could feel the tension. Small groups whispering near the coffee machine. Side glances. My colleagues were confused. Curious, but no one asked me anything directly. That's when I realized, even though he was gone, the damage wasn't. Not really. The people who had believed the worst about me, the ones who had spread the rumors, none of them came forward. None of them apologized. Instead, they avoided me. I was radioactive. I went home that night feeling completely hollow. I sat in my living room, staring at the walls, the untouched glass of wine still sitting on the table from the night before. I should have felt relief. Or victory. Or something. But all I felt was exhaustion. Bone-deep exhaustion. It wasn't just about the job anymore. It was about trust. About who I'd become through this whole nightmare. I thought about how much faith I'd put in Philippe when I started. How I'd looked up to him. How I used to sit in meetings and take notes like every word out of his mouth mattered. And I thought about all the small ways he'd chipped away at me over time, how he'd made me question myself, how he'd twisted situations to make me feel like I was the one at fault. The manipulation hadn't started on that business trip. It had started long before. I just hadn't seen it. And now, sitting there alone, I realized something terrifying: I didn't know if I would ever fully trust anyone again. The next morning, HR reached out to me again. They wanted a follow-up conversation. The email was polite, but I could read between the lines. They wanted to know if I planned to sue. If I was going to take this further. I stared at the screen for a long time. I didn't know the answer. Part of me wanted to let it go. To close this chapter, move on, pretend it never happened. I was tired, so tired. But another part of me, the deeper part, knew I couldn't, because if I stayed silent, it would happen again. To someone else. Maybe someone younger. Someone without the tiny scraps of support I'd managed to find. I took a deep breath and called the lawyer I'd been too afraid to contact until now. Her name was Claire. She specialized in workplace harassment and retaliation cases. When I explained everything to her, every detail, every message, every manipulation, she didn't flinch. She just asked, "Do you want to file?" I hesitated. I felt my throat close up. I whispered, "I don't know." She was patient. She told me the risks. The process, the reality. That even though Philippe was gone, the legal path would be long, exhausting, public in ways I might not like. But then she said something I'll never forget: "If you don't stand up for yourself, who will?" I hung up the phone with her voice still ringing in my head. That night, I barely slept again. My mind kept racing through every scenario. What if I lost? What if it ruined my career forever? What if people kept seeing me as the problem instead of the victim? But there was something stronger than fear this time. Anger. I was angry that someone like Philippe could use people, discard them, and walk away with a clean slate. I was angry that for weeks, I'd questioned my own sanity while he pulled the strings. And I was angry that even now, when I had survived, I still felt like I was the one carrying the weight. I made my decision the next morning. I emailed Claire. I told her I was ready to file. And in that moment, something inside me shifted permanently. I wasn't the scared version of myself anymore. I wasn't the employee desperately trying to please everyone, to survive the office politics, to climb the ladder quietly. I was done being polite. The following weeks were brutal. I won't lie. Claire and I worked on the case day and night. We drafted statements. We gathered timelines. We pushed for internal documents through formal requests. The HR department, who once treated me like an outsider, suddenly became very attentive. I was no longer invisible. The two women who had helped me? They agreed to provide official testimony, and more names started to appear, other women who hadn't spoken until now. Some still working in the company. Some too scared to come forward but willing to submit anonymous statements. The full picture of what Philippe had done over the years was horrifying. He hadn't just hurt me. He had built his entire career on a web of manipulation, control, and exploitation. And for the first time, it wasn't going to stay hidden. The day I signed the legal papers, my official complaint, I felt something I hadn't felt in months, powerful. I knew it wouldn't be easy. I knew the backlash could still come. I knew people might whisper, might judge, might doubt. But for the first time, I didn't care. I wasn't doing this just for me anymore. I was doing it for every woman he'd stepped on. Every career he'd destroyed. Every voice he'd silenced. And deep down, I knew one thing for sure: whatever happened next, I was never going back to who I used to be. They could call me difficult. They could call me emotional. They could call me whatever they wanted. I was finally standing. And I wasn't backing down. The weeks that followed the filing of my complaint were some of the longest, most draining days of my life. It felt like I was living in two parallel worlds: the official one, where everything seemed quiet and polite on the surface, and the underground one, full of tension, whispers, and fear, where the real battle was happening. I could feel the weight of every glance in the office. Even though Philippe was gone, the damage he'd left behind still clung to the air like smoke after a fire. Some people I thought were my friends, distanced themselves. They didn't want to be associated with drama. Others acted overly polite, as if walking on eggshells around me. But I held my ground. Every morning I woke up, I reminded myself why I was doing this. Not just for me. For every woman who'd walked through those doors before me, and for every woman who would come after. The first media leak happened 2 weeks after I filed. I wasn't the one who spoke to the press, I made that clear to my lawyer. But someone, somewhere, whispered the truth to the right journalist. A small article appeared in an online business news outlet: senior executive resigns amid misconduct allegations. No names. No details. But it was enough. That same day, I received an email from one of the senior directors, someone who had barely spoken to me in 2 years. He wanted to check in, to offer support, to assure me the company was taking this seriously. I saw right through it. Damage control. Pure PR. But it didn't matter. The wheel had already started turning. And then came the retaliation. Subtle, at first. Small things. My email access mysteriously revoked for security reasons. A project I was leading suddenly reassigned without explanation. Meetings accidentally scheduled without me. I documented everything. Every single thing. Claire was relentless. She told me, in her calm, razor-sharp way, "This is classic. They're testing you. Don't blink." And I didn't. But privately? I was unraveling. I barely slept. My hands shook constantly. I jumped at every email notification. I started avoiding social gatherings, even with people I trusted. My world shrank to my apartment, my lawyer's office, and the endless cycle of calls and document reviews. One night, I broke down completely. I lay on the bathroom floor for hours, sobbing so hard I could barely breathe. The weight of it all, the fear, the anger, the loneliness, felt unbearable. I kept thinking, what if I lose? What if they crush me? What if my name is the one that gets ruined forever? But in the morning, I got back up. Because by then, it wasn't a choice anymore. It was survival. And then something unexpected happened. One of the junior associates, someone I barely knew, approached me in the hallway. She looked nervous, terrified even. She asked if we could speak privately. We sat in the cafe downstairs. Her hands were shaking as she told me that Philippe had targeted her too, in small ways. That he'd cornered her at the office Christmas party 2 years earlier, made disgusting comments, touched her lower back even when she pulled away. She had never told anyone. She was too afraid. I felt my throat close up. She wasn't the first. She wouldn't be the last. I asked her gently if she'd be willing to write a statement. She hesitated, tears welling in her eyes. But then she nodded. I don't want him to do this to someone else. I knew, in that moment, that no matter how scared I was doing the right thing. We gathered more voices. More statements. The case grew. The internal pressure inside the company mounted. HR became increasingly desperate to keep things quiet. They offered me a confidential settlement. A large sum. An NDA. I didn't even hesitate. I refused. I wasn't here for a payout. I was here for the truth. One morning, I walked into the office and found an envelope on my desk. No name. No note. Just a single sheet of paper with 4 typed words, "You should be careful." My hands went cold. My vision blurred. I had to lock myself in the bathroom to stop myself from vomiting. It was a threat. Plain and simple. I took it to Claire immediately. She was livid. She escalated the case. Filed for additional protections. The company went into full lockdown mode after that. Emergency board meetings. An outside law firm brought in to conduct an independent investigation. The atmosphere in the office turned suffocating. I became the story. The whispered name. The woman who wouldn't back down. But by then, I'd come too far to care. I was done being afraid. Even if it cost me everything. Even if it destroyed the career I had spent years building. I was going to see this through. And Philippe, wherever he was finally going to face the consequences of the life he'd built on other people's silence. The moment I saw those 4 words, "You should be careful," something in me changed forever. I wish I could say I panicked or cried or even got angry in that moment, but the truth is, I went completely numb. Like my body just shut down. The fear was still there, buried somewhere deep, but it was distant now. I wasn't just fighting for my career anymore. I was fighting for my life. I handed the note over to Claire immediately. She didn't even blink. She'd seen this before, she said, cases where power and ego spiral so far out of control that intimidation becomes the last desperate move. She filed for immediate legal protections on my behalf. Restraining orders, formal cease and desists. The company, probably terrified of a full public scandal, complied with everything. I was assigned an internal HR liaison and security escort when leaving the office. It felt surreal. Like I was living someone else's story. But the worst part wasn't the threat. It wasn't the whispers in the hallway or the way people looked away when I walked past. The worst part was the crushing loneliness. I was isolated in every way possible. My social circle at work had evaporated. Even my closest friends didn't know how to act around me. Every interaction felt loaded, fragile, tense. And still, I kept going. I don't know where the strength came from. Every morning I woke up, shaking, heart pounding before I even got out of bed. I would stare at the ceiling, some days for an hour, telling myself, "Get up. Just get up." The media picked up more pieces of the story. Larger outlets this time. The company's name was out there. People started connecting the dots. And while no one used my name directly, the office knew. Everyone knew. I received anonymous emails, some supportive, some cruel. "Thank you for speaking up," one said. "You'll regret this," said another. It was like living inside a nightmare you can't wake from. And then came the turning point. One of the other victims, the quietest one, the woman who had originally refused to go on record, changed her mind. She called me one night, her voice shaking. She said she'd had enough. That she'd seen the articles. That she felt guilty for staying silent. Her statement changed everything. With her testimony added to the pile, the investigation moved fast. Philippe was officially named in the internal report. The company quietly offered settlements to multiple women. Legal proceedings began behind closed doors. And me? I became both untouchable and untouchable. Protected by law, but alone in practice. One of the senior directors, the same one who had checked in weeks earlier, pulled me aside. He tried to reassure me. Told me the company was grateful I'd come forward. That they were committed to creating a safer workplace. I looked him in the eyes and asked, "Where were you when it mattered?" He didn't have an answer. The whispers faded, slowly. Some people came back around, cautiously polite again. But I wasn't the same. I'd seen too much. One afternoon, I stayed late at the office, something I hadn't done since the whole nightmare began. I sat alone, the lights dimmed, the city glowing outside the window, and I let myself cry. For the first time in weeks, I actually let it out. Not because I felt broken. But because I felt free. Philippe was gone. The lies were exposed. My name was still intact. And for the first time since this started, I wasn't afraid anymore, but I also knew that this would stay with me forever. The damage. The fear. The strength I'd had to find deep inside myself just to survive. I wasn't the same woman I'd been before any of this. I didn't think I ever would be. And I realized that was okay. Because what they tried to break only made me harder. The day the company's final decision was announced, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel relief. I didn't even feel anger. I felt empty. They issued a formal internal memo, one that carefully avoided naming anyone directly but made clear that an investigation into misconduct had led to necessary departures and a renewed commitment to workplace safety and equity. It was the most corporate, sanitized apology I'd ever seen in my life. I sat at my desk, reading the words over and over. I barely even blinked. Philippe's name was never mentioned. Mine neither, but we both knew who that message was about. Everyone in that building did. I thought I'd feel something. Some huge wave of vindication. Some closure. Instead, I just felt tired. The case settled quietly after that. The legal side of things played out behind closed doors. I can't speak about the details, legally, I'm not allowed to, but what I can say is this: I didn't back down, and they didn't win. The damage to my career? That's harder to explain. I kept my position. I kept my salary. On paper, nothing changed. But in reality, everything did. People looked at me differently, some with admiration, some with discomfort, some with open resentment. I became the woman who sued. The one who spoke up. The one who broke the code of silence. I stopped getting invited to after-work events. I was passed over for one promotion already, though they dressed it up with pretty excuses about departmental restructuring. I could feel the ceiling closing in. Quiet. Invisible. But there. And I think that's the part no one talks about. It's not just the harassment itself that destroys you, it's the aftermath. The isolation. The way people you thought you knew suddenly don't know how to look you in the eye. The way you stop trusting your own instincts. For weeks after everything ended, I found myself flinching every time my phone buzzed. I jumped when someone said my name unexpectedly. I kept thinking, what if he comes back? What if this isn't really over? The anxiety is like a shadow I can't fully shake. But despite all of it, despite the loneliness, the exhaustion, the career damage, I don't regret speaking up. Not for 1 second. Because the silence would have destroyed me more than the fight ever could, and the messages I got, quiet, anonymous ones from other women, proved I wasn't alone. Women who'd never met me, who just said thank you. Who said they'd been through something similar. who said they wished they'd had the strength to do the same. I carry those messages in my heart. I still work at the same company for now. But I'm different. I'm sharper. Stronger in a way I never wanted to be but had to become. I don't trust easily anymore. I watch people more carefully. But I know who I am. I'm the woman who survived. And even on the darkest nights, when the fear creeps back in, I remind myself, I didn't let them break me. I don't know what comes next. I don't know if I'll stay or if I'll walk away from all of this and start over somewhere new. All I know is that I'm still standing. And they'll never take that from me.
Follow me for more stories.